Welcome to Handmade History.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Alicia, and this week I'm coming to you with a very special bonus episode. I'm talking with Jane Healey. Jane Healey is the author of the Saturday Evening Girls Club, Good Night from Paris, The Secret Stealers, and The Beantown Girls, a Washington Post and Amazon Charts bestseller. The Women of Arlington Hall was released in July 2025. She is also the host of the Jane Healey Happy Hour podcast, where she interviews fellow authors about their latest novels. A graduate of the University of New Hampshire and Northeastern University, Jane shares a home north of Boston with her husband, 2 daughters, a cat, and a dog. Jane Healey has given presentations about the history behind her novels to hundreds of libraries, book clubs, and organizations around the country, including the Jewish Book Council Network and the American Red Cross. Jane, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really happy to have you here. So we've been doing a read-along of the Saturday Evening Girls Club. It's a really great book. And if you have been reading along with us, I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we did. And if you haven't been reading along, you should totally grab a copy and read it. So, Jane, I thought we would start with how you discovered the Saturday Evening Girls Club. So you were freelance writing for a magazine?
I was, yeah, this was years ago now. So I was after my girls were born, they're young adults now, so that was a while ago. I pivoted from high tech to doing freelance work, freelance writing for magazines and newspapers and pretty much anyone who would pay me. I did some ghostwriting. And I wrote an article about the Saturday Evening Girls Club pottery. I was doing this like monthly um like monthly series on like New England antiques, and I have no experience in antiques, by the way. I just like, again, whatever they paid me for. And I was really intrigued by this pottery that I had never heard of, this group of women in Boston's North End. I'd always wanted to write fiction, but for a long time I didn't really give myself permission to try. I didn't really give myself permission to take the time to do it. When I wrote this article, I kind of started to dig deeper into who these women were and their story. And I said to my husband at the time, like, oh, I think this is my first novel. And it took about a decade to actually like get it published. But yes, it turned out to be my first novel.
That is so cool. So I was really curious how you decided to tell Caprice's story. Did you like find a person that you were kind of like, oh, this would be a good character for my book, or did you combine some, or how did you invent her?
Yeah, Caprice was kind of a composite of all the different women I read about who were in the club. And I wanted, one of the things that intrigued me about the club was that it was, for the time, it was a kind of diverse, right? It was like Jewish women and Jewish young American women and Italian young American women. Most of them were firstborn immigrants from immigrant families and firstborn in America. And so I knew I wanted to have a group of friends that, reflected that diversity. So a couple of them are Jewish and two of them are Italian. I liked the idea of Caprice's story being like a woman who longed for more than most women wanted at the time, or strived for more. She wanted to be an entrepreneur at a time that it was very, very difficult to do that. We're talking early 1900s. So yeah, I would say like she wasn't. None of the main characters are based directly on any characters from history. They're more just composites of the different experiences of women at that time.
Yeah, I love that. And I loved how the friends, they had so much in common, even though their families were like culturally different. There were still a lot like the same kind of problems and challenges. They had a lot of those very, that's because they were young women. Um,
Yeah, yeah, young women, and I think that family dynamics are universal.
yeah,
Like the struggles that mothers and daughters and fathers and daughters go through, and siblings and all of that, are really universal and haven't changed that much in over 100 years. So
It's true. A lot of it is still so relatable. So I was wondering, could you tell me about your research process? What did you, how'd you get started? And then what kind of resources did you use to learn more about the girl?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few books, not many, about the pottery and about them. One of the founders of the club, Edith Guerriere, had a biography that I was able to find used online. That was extremely helpful. There's a kind of I forget the two authors. They did kind of a Bible of Saturday Evening Girls Pottery. It's photography book of all the different pieces, but also provided a lot of history. Some smaller novel. I mean, not novels. There's another book, like a smaller book, just about the pottery's history. But then at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard, this was again years ago. They did have some, kind of original source. You always want original sources, materials about any sort of research that you're doing, and they had some of like the old newsletters from the club and some more archival type information that I was able to use as well. That Schlesinger is a research library. It's excellent for like American women's history, sources for American women's history. It's not like you can just walk in; you have to make an appointment, and they pull the files from their archives. But that was really helpful as well. I'm trying to think. I know now there's a UMass Boston also has some archive material of the Saturday Evening Girls Club that has since been donated. After I wrote this book, but that's another source. And then a couple places have pieces, not so much history, but pieces of the pottery. One is the Girl Scout Museum in Waltham, Massachusetts, has a bunch of pieces because there's the connection between Helen Starrow, who was who really was the philanthropist who helped fund the club, and the Girl Scouts, and then the North Bennett Street School in the North End, I think, has a few pieces as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's interesting because in our episode about the Saturday Evening Girls, we well, in my research, I just found that once um, so the Bennett Street School was very important for getting the Saturday Evening Girls started, but then they didn't really have much to do with Paul Revere pottery. They didn't let girls in the pottery classes that they held. So that's kind of interesting to have some pieces of theirs.
Yeah.
That's-
Yeah, they do have some pieces as far, or they did. I haven't checked recently, but
Yeah.
they did. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So I also loved the cameos of some of the real SEGs like Sarah Gelmer and Tiffany Goldstein, and I wondered why you put them in, and if you ever thought about writing their story.
Yeah, I didn't wanna, because this is, I mean, I think anything that's relatively recent history, there's gonna be descendants, and I just didn't want anyone to get uncomfortable being like, "Oh, you're writing a story about my great-grandmother," or, something like that. I wanted the freedom and the flexibility to have, like, fictional characters as the main characters, but at the same time, I wanted to honor some of the women that were really, so important to the club in terms of the aesthetic and the talent. Like the Sarah Gallner was one of the most talented of the group in terms of her artistry, and so that's why I wanted to pull her in, Fanny Goldstein, like so that yeah, that I really just want to kind of honor them and like give a nod to the real women of the club.
Yeah, I think it's so special because I really liked seeing them. It was fun. Like, oh, there they are. And then kind of a similar question. So I know you decided to combine the two Ediths. So instead of having Edith Guerriere, who was kind of the founder of the club, and then her partner, Edith, oh no, I'm blanking on her last
Brown.
name. Edith Brown, sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
she was like the artist. I mean, they were both artists, but she was the one who kind of taught pottery and art classes. And they were partners. So instead of having the two Ediths, you kind of put them together. Can you tell me more about your decision to do that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question because I've gotten some emails over the years of people who are angry that I made that decision. And I understand why, because they were partners, lifelong partners. It was a big romance, and some women, some people in the gay community consider them like iconic figures in terms of like representation. And quite honestly, it was my first novel. It took me a while to figure out how to write this book. Like I said, 10 years. I felt I really, Edith Guerriere, she had a biography. I could get a read on who she was. Edith Brown was an incredibly private person. So I didn't really I couldn't find much about her. And then to have two Ediths that really they were really both kind of like ran the club together. Like I just felt like it was confusing me. I originally had the both Ediths included, and then I was like, I can't. I just felt like in writing fiction, you always think about how you can like streamline the story and make it less confusing and more. I don't know. I mean, I'm not being articulate enough with this, but basically, I felt like I needed to combine the two because they were both kind of serving the same purpose in the narrative, and it would have been too confusing for the reader. It was confusing for me, so I knew it would be confusing for the reader, and that's why. But
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I would have figured out a way to include that relationship in the book had I written the book today. Like I regret that because I didn't understand what they represented to the gay community at the time. And I wasn't trying to erase that history,
Of course. Of course. But I think people don't realize too, like how different things were when you published this book because now sapphic love stories are everywhere. They're on the mainstream bookshelf. It's easy, in the romance section. But 10 years ago, not, I mean, I would say even like 5 or 7 years ago, that wasn't the case. And I wonder if you would have gotten the book published if you had included that. Because, yeah, people like attitudes to publishing, I feel like have changed in attitudes, just like the public is more accepting, welcoming of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very true. And but and they weren't they were a big part of the story, but they weren't the central characters in the story. They were kind of supporting characters, and it was just even with like having four main characters, women characters was a lot, and then pulling in all these other women, I just had to really kind of pare it down a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Um, that makes sense, and, thanks for, like, talking about it because I think it's really interesting, and I do think things have changed a lot, so
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm glad you brought it up because over the years I've written back to the people who have been upset by the fact that I didn't include the both Ediths, and then like I was a new writer, I was a newbie, like writing
yeah,
fiction, so I really it was really just a structural kind of narrative choice that had nothing to do with them as a couple. It really wasn't that. It was just that it was
yeah.
too hard. Yeah, so.
Were there any other, like, kind of fun or interesting storylines that you wanted to include but couldn't for whatever reason? Or maybe, like, some aspect of your research that you're like, "Oh, that'd be so, neat to include," but you weren't able to?
Yeah, there was a lot, but one that I really wanted to include was like because Helen Starrow had a beach house in Gloucester, and the girls would go there on like an actual vacation in the summer together, and I really wanted to include that, but it just didn't fit the narrative in the way this story takes place over a year, and you have to make choices, and that just wasn't going to work.
Yeah. Yeah, that part would be really fun because, in my research, I found, like, photos of the girls at the beach, and it's so fun. It looks so fun. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, "Oh, that would have been good." Like, that's a whole story in of self, So
Yeah. I think that was most of my questions about the Saturday Evening Girls Club. I wonder if there are things that you're working on now that you want to share. Is there I know you discovered a research trip at your own.
yeah, yeah. So I'm working on, I've kind of pivoted. My last before the Women Around Tell, my last couple books were World War II, and I decided I needed to like pivot to another era. So this is like World War II adjacent. It's early Cold War, and it's about a lot of things. I have to work on my elevator pitch, frankly, but it's basically about kind of the early days of the Cold War in Europe and kind of the U.S. role and the CIA's role, and it's about it's again the main character is fictionalized female CIA agent in the early days of the Cold War in Rome. Yeah.
And I'm curious, so you said you had always wanted to write fiction. Did you always want to be a historical fiction writer?
I've always loved historical fiction. I'd always, I think that one of the things I liked about um, with the Saturday Evening Girls and what I like about historical fiction is that it gives you, whether it's a person, place, or thing, it gives you a jumping off point for fiction. I mean, I never say never to like write in another genre, but I like the idea of using something as a jumping off point to write to write a fictionalized story. So that's how I ended up with historical fiction, and then I just kind of stayed in this lane. So
I think it's really neat that there are so many stories about girls and women that you have shared that I've never heard of. Like I would say almost all of them. So it's a great like specific genre. Even it's not just, historical fiction, it's these untold stories. And there's so many of them.
yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, there is, and I feel like we're in a great time in fiction and nonfiction where there's so many of these stories of women in history that have not been told or not been highlighted. They've kind of been kind of a side note, and that's been really fun for me to try to find angles and try to find stories of women who have not really been explored or celebrated before.
When I was in 8th grade, I had to do a history project, and I found out about the Women Air Force Service pilots, the WASP. And since then, I found out that like a relative in my husband's family was one of the WASPs. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, there's been a few stories about them too. I think
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember who the authors were. Maybe Elise Hooper. I can't remember. I have to look it up. But yeah.
Yeah. Then there was also, I think, like a nonfiction book.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to catch up and read it. Yeah. And then this is just kind of a fun question. I know you live north of Boston. Do you go to the North End? Do you have any favorite places there?
Yeah, we haven't been going to the North End as much like in recent years, but my husband was living in the North End when we first met. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary, so it's like
Oh,
many
fun.
years ago. But yeah, no, I love the North End. I love even I know people say, oh, it's been gentrified and this, that, but I love that you can like turn a corner and the street looks the same as it did like 100 years ago. It still has that charm.
Yeah.
They still have the festivals. There's still some amazing old bakeries there that my girls love the cannolis at from Bova and Mike's Pastry, and so we still hit those places sometimes on the way home from somewhere or whatever. Yeah, no, I love the North End, and because my husband was living there when we met, it holds a special place in my heart. And also,
Oh,
yeah, thank you, and also because this is my debut, and it was a hard. Writing is hard. Writing fiction is hard. Getting your first book is published is really hard, and so the Saturday Evening Girls Club and the North End will always hold a special place in my heart for that too.
oh, that's so great. That. Was there anything else that I could have asked you about the Saturday Evening Girl Club or about your books?
No, yeah, no. The only thing I should have mentioned too is one of the things I've heard emails over the years about the Ediths, but I've also heard from many descendants of the Saturday Evening Girls Club, or just women, or just people whose, mothers or grandmothers or great grandmothers grew up in the North End, and they've like had really kind words about the story and how it brought back memories of their family members, and some have shared pictures, and that's just the best. That's been amazing.
That is so special. That's so awesome. Oh,
Yeah.
I love that.
Hmm.
Oh, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for listening. If you have a question or a comment, you can email us at handmadehistoryhosts, that's HOSTS @gmail.com, or visit our website at handmadehistorypodcast.com. And if you'd like to learn about the read-along of Jane's book, The Saturday Evening Girls Club, you can find all of our posts on our Patreon page at patreon.com/handmadehistorypodcast. Thanks. Bye.